welcome to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diabloinkgamers.com. I am the host Flux, and this is part 2 of the show, which part 1 ran yesterday with Aahz and Xanth. In part 1, we talked about the patches and how Diablo 3 has gotten a lot easier over time, easier and better for that matter, and speculated on what new content we might see before the expansion, and talked about Whimsyshire a little bit. This is part 2, and it picks up right where part 1 left off. This one covers mostly the auction house and a lot of stuff about the economy and hacks and gold botting, and also something about the story of Diablo 3 and a little bit of nonsense at the end. Here you go. Okay, one other topic that's of very minor importance and hasn't really mattered much in Diablo 3. Botting and hacks. You guys seen any evidence of this? Probably
Botting?
not, though. No one does any of this. There's no gold botting in Diablo 3.
Um, no, just, some firms here and there that are slowly destroying the economy, gold
Slowly.
value.
I mentioned I was looking for that Stone of Jordan with, good stuff for a Tempest Rush monk, and those on hardcore, there were like 2 in the entire auction house, and they were 500 million or more. And then I checked on in softcore with my monk just for the hell of it to compare, and I found several of them for under 3 million. So they were 250 times the price in hardcore, and there were 2 of them. And in softcore, there are hundreds, and they're almost free. And maybe this has something to do with the fact that you don't ever die and nothing ever leaves the economy in softcore. I mean, obviously that's got a big impact,
Right.
and you can farm your ass off with really crappy gear in softcore, where in hardcore you'll just die and go away and cry.
And there's more people playing softcore too.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are bots that are constantly pumping gold into the economy in vast quantities.
Right.
I assume it's going on. I mean, I don't know anybody who does it, but it makes sense that it's happening because you can make money that way. You can't make money in hardcore off of it, so it's not happening over there.
Well, at least not without going to third-party sites, but
Right.
no one ever did
Oh,
that because that was
fair
dangerous.
enough.
Yeah, dangerous. Um, I don't know. I mean, obviously it exists. I keep getting friend requests from them, so
Good point.
jerks.
And I was talking to another guy who's got a very high-level hardcore character today, and he said that he thinks he's heard some bots are coming into hardcore now. As you were mentioning earlier, Oz, you can equip a barb so he basically will never die anymore, especially on MP0.
Hmm.
And I was looking in the archives of our website stuff and all these news posts, and there was a whole big thing from like last September or October about gold botting, and apparently there'd been some news about it. And people were talking about how testing and how you could easily pull in 5 million a day just running in like Nightmare and MP10.
Right.
And that was with much lower quality characters. You just get high level gold stuff. And once you get Paragon levels, I mean, it was, when you wanted to bot in Diablo 2, people had Pendle bots and Meph bots and stuff, and that was looking for items. And in Diablo 3, you can just pick up gold. You can just make a bot that has got a ton of gold radius and just score up, 10, 20, 50 million a day, 24 hours a day forever. And, sooner or later, that's, real money. Sooner, if you're in hardcore at least.
Right.
And it's going to be interesting to see if this actually starts happening in hardcore, even without the real money auction house. If people are just going to start flooding in and buying stuff and selling those items for real money via third-party sites or what.
Yeah, I think obviously with that there are, some hiccups. I mean, it just takes a disconnect to kind of throw the whole thing out the window. Um, and that's maybe that's the biggest deterrent. But I could see it happening. I could see it coming in eventually.
I was looking at we have this thing on the main page of the site that has the people in our ladder system on Diablo3ladders.com, and it shows, and occasionally you'll see one person that suddenly has a monster score that's like 8 times higher than anybody else, and that's because they're botting. And we delete those from the record because it's not much fun to compete against someone who's got a 24-hour a day connection. But I
Right.
was looking at one of the barbarians, the number one ranked guy. He was like 900,000 monster score. The next best human was 180K or something like that. And he had, I forget adding it up, he had 12% life steal and over 2,000 life on hit from his gear,
Shimmy.
and like 67,000 hit points. And I forget the other stuff, but I mean apparently that's what you do when you're making a barbarian bot. You just make it so, and he had like 800 life regen per second or something like that. So I think he would probably be fine with a disconnect,
Yeah.
unless he was like literally fighting Belial at that point.
Right.
And that was obviously softcore, but it just seems like people have found ways to exploit the game in a level, especially with MP0. You just have to get a macro that runs around the levels in some way, the preset level designs and such, and then you can ruin everything for everyone. So, okay, story. There was lots of discussion and wondering about story and atmosphere and stuff pre-game. Is it going to have the horror elements? So we had that whole thing where there's not going to be any crosses or pentagrams because this isn't Earth and they have a different mythology, etc.
Right.
And then of course there's like bloody pentagrams every square inch of the game. I'm not sure what happened there.
Miscommunication.
I guess I'm glad they're there, but the thing I thought was funny about that is, they were saying, we're not going to have this, and we don't want to have symbols of earthly religions and customs and cultures, etc. Which, okay, that makes sense. But then they didn't replace it with anything. I figured they were going to have like some like ominous symbol, like the Horde has that symbol, you see on Warcraft shirts and stuff, with like the triangle and the thing, whatever it is.
I think it might
I
be in the
figured they would
game
have like,
too. Hmm.
well, you see them on people's T-shirts at BlizzCon. That's pretty much all I know about
Oh,
it. But
okay.
yeah, the fatter and nerdier they are, the more they have Horde stuff on. Okay, wait, I shouldn't say that.
Oh, you're gonna get so many angry
For the
emails.
Cheetos. Okay, sorry, but I noticed Aahz isn't laughing. She's freaking the Horde. So, and then the Cheetos, for all of you know. Are you eating Cheetos right now, Aahz?
I'm not. I've never played World of Warcraft, so.
Yeah, your fingers are orange, I can tell. But anyway, but then there's not, there was all this stuff about the story. We were kind of interested, and they had those really cool like atmospheric, the writings of Aahz, Alzir, Hakim, whatever his name was,
Yeah.
and on the Diablo website. And I was kind of psyched up for the story, thinking it's going to be cool. What's going to happen with Kayn, what's to do with Leah? Will she ever get laid? To Tyrael get his wings back, etc. And then the game came out, and the story wasn't as popular as some people had hoped it to be. Do you have memories of the early days of the story, Aahz?
Well, honestly, not so much, except that, you could pretty much see what was coming. Um, but as I tried to fill in my conversation achievements just for something to do, the backstories are pretty interesting. The lore stories, the side stories are pretty interesting. I thought they did a really solid job with that. Just the main story didn't pull me in. So I know that's not really a new complaint, but it just seems like a missed opportunity, I guess.
Go, Xanth.
Um, I just remember being partially annoyed by some things. I remember really,
Partially?
yeah, well, I stopped paying attention after some point, but I remember in the beta really enjoying all the little side stuff that was coming up. And I just kind of expected that feeling to continue, but it didn't, unfortunately. Um, like especially when you have asthma down, showing up every 2 minutes to tell you what he's up to, and you know, give you a Facebook friend request or whatever. Like it's just ridiculous. It gets annoying. And then the just like the cohesiveness of the story, like it almost all it felt like it just was too easy. Like not the game itself, but the way the story was structured. Like where, all right, well, now you beat this, so you'll never be able to defeat this, and kind of like I don't know, like a Sunday morning cartoon bad guy dialogue. I remember, I think I was reading a fan theory or something about what could do with the story is, with the next act is you wake up and you realize you're trapped by Belial, and that was all like a gigantic lie, and that's why it was actually so easy. Um, I would love that, just like, oh, sorry, the story sucked or the story wasn't up to our par, and then you get to go back through the new act and they've completely changed it. Um, I don't know, but I liked that concept.
It's fun to pretend.
Right.
Okay, my first premonition that the story might be not what we were hoping was when the Demon Hunter cinematic came out, which was, I think, the last character introduced, and it was just the dialogue came with butter and salt. It was just that corny, and it was like, I will keep killing them as long as they keep coming. It just like dialogue you would not get in like a Bruce Willis movie. It was even cornier than that. And we were just I remember watching that at BlizzCon, sitting on the show floor, all excited about the archer class. We didn't know what it was going to be, and here it is, and it's just like, and I will defend and it's like, gee, let's see, a hero who's driven to revenge by the death of her family in her childhood. Boy, I haven't seen that before. Really breaking some new ground there, guys.
Right.
and then it was just so corny in the dialogue, and people were really like, "This is awful. What happened here?" The other ones we liked, like the monk one, was pretty good when he went, into Alcarnus and fought the guys and stuff. And people seemed pretty positive about the wizard one as well, where she went and killed the skeleton king, and it was kind of atmospheric and moody. And the demon hunter one was the first one that had a lot of dialogue, perhaps as a precursor of Pumpkinhead and his Act 3 tauntings. But my theory at the time was that this cinematic has to go into 15 languages and be translated all over the world, and has to be very easily recognizable. And it's like a Michael Bay movie, it's like Transformers. It needs to be kind of this Disneyfied, very easily grasped, obvious thing, and it can't be have a lot of subtleties and nuances. And maybe Diablo 3 is just like a Hollywood blockbuster, and they have to throw out all the smart nuances and subtleties, and they can't assume that you're paying attention to the plot, which is why Asmodee comes up and says the same thing 14 times in a hologramic form. And Belial says the same thing every time, and Diablo spends all of Act 4 saying terror. And is this just unavoidable when you're going for this mass market of a game that has to be translated into 47 languages and be easily comprehensible to people who aren't paying attention?
I don't think so, though. I don't think so at all. I mean, there's how many games that come out and that have to be, put out into different markets that can translate and they don't have to dilute their story for that. Um, I think a part of it is a lot of Blizzard's storytelling has kind of started to I don't know, like it started to kind of repeat, or it's kind of hit a snag where they're falling back on certain conventions that may have worked 10, 15 years ago, that in the storytelling that we're starting to see with a lot of games that doesn't necessarily work, that they're almost becoming like cliched, and
Almost.
well, yeah, they are cliched. Um,
So you're saying that the theory of a young, fragile female being possessed by a really powerful enemy force and becoming stronger than ever has been used before in another Blizzard game?
I
Leah wasn't original?
Did that happen in Warcraft? I
I, I can't. Karaligan? I forget the name exactly, but it was something very different.
yeah. Um, I don't know. I couldn't honestly tell you. But yeah, there are certain cliches that kind of get put in there, and you would have kind of thought with Diablo 3, with it being its own story and its new breaking away had been so long, that we wouldn't fall into that trap necessarily, but it kind of did. Um, and that's why I really liked that Belial fan theory, because then it would play off of the cheesiness of what had happened and be kind of a little different um, than kind of where we are now. I would agree with Oz, in the terms that like a lot of the side stuff is really interesting and compelling. It's just the main story got kind of cliched out.
I think the story
It,
just needs more pandas.
yeah.
Well, it's one of those things. Like I remember reading all the short stories before launch for each of the characters, and they were really well done. And I was actually really pumped to see what was going to happen as a result of it, and then they didn't capitalize on that.
See, this is why I have my theory, and I goes with what Az said earlier. I think all of the side stuff is really well done. The backstories of all of the followers are interesting. Like I want to go and see, rescue Leiden's brother and his, sister-in-law or whatever. And it's interesting the Templar, the whole thing with the Order being corrupted. I mean, all those are really good stories.
Right.
And there's tons of lore books. I like that. There was a quote from Max Schaefer right after the game came out about the story. I was doing all this research for these, year in review stuff, and he was saying I really loved their storytelling tools. And to be honest, the story for Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 was tacked on at the last second. That's why it was all told through books, and there was really nothing integrating the plot of the game. And at this point, people were already saying they don't like the story of Diablo 3, so they were like, "What is he talking about? This is a terrible story." And okay, maybe it was, and maybe Max agreed with that. But what he was saying was the tools were great, and the way all the lore books play, and you find all these little things, and when you get a monster for the first time, you get a little voiceover talking about its stuff. And I think all that was really good, and just the main story in the game and the cutscenes. Okay, Magda and Cain. Is anybody not disappointed by Magda and Cain?
Right. That was
And that's why I think it's all just they consciously chose to dumb down and make very easy and obvious all the main character plot stuff. And that's why Asmodan taunts you 45 times. And then they have good storytelling abilities, and you see that in all of the subtle details and all of the cinematics and the smaller aspects of things. But the in-game stuff is all made dumb on purpose. And you guys disagree.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I all the evidence certainly points to that.
So seriously, Magda,
you're right.
if
Oh,
we're running,
How did she find Kane? How did she just all of a sudden get all that
he
stuff?
he was in his house, ironically enough. Who knew? She hovered on the door and it said Kane's house, and there he was. I'm not sure how she got, and she can just teleport wherever she wants, apparently. That was before they put the portals in around Tristram, so at that point monsters could just walk right into town. So
Ah,
if only he'd lived after V103, he'd still be alive today.
and finally, we have IDL again.
But I really have wondered, often in games you can make sort of a comical, like the Joker kind of thing in Batman, where like he's comical and yet he's also menacing at the same time. And I kind of wondered if Magda was meant to be that. I mean, she's like this Harley Quinn thing, and she floats around and she giggles, and she has giant butterflies on her shoulders. And it's almost like a parody of a monster, like she's so over the top. It's supposed to be funny in a way, but I don't think it is. I think someone thought she'd be cool, and we'll have her kill the most recognizable figure of the entire game series in
right.
totally undramatic form, and no one will mind.
Yeah, I think, that, and then you also look at the other monsters too. I mean, previously in the other parts of the series, there was an element of mystery to each of those primevals and stuff like that, and I think that's what made them daunting and fearful. But then, like, once you find out Asmodan just doesn't shut up like a teenage girl, it shapes your opinion on the actual story itself. Because like all the backstory and like all the stuff in the Book of Cain and stuff like that, that's really cool. That's really interesting. But then if that kind of information's coming through and never, a never ending sphere that just is always taunting you about something stupid, you lose respect for the actual story.
I like how sometimes you kill Asmodan and then he continues to taunt you. You'll never defeat me. But wait, aren't you dead already? Just things like that
Well,
really
those are just holograms. Those are just messages waiting on a recorder. It's like, future technology. So,
you just really want them to put in the farming mode in the next you know we jump between acts, go to any waypoint you want, no cutscenes, no
Yeah.
conversations. That would be something to look forward to maybe in 109.
so do you think the developers have learned from this and the general fan backlash to the story, and will they do smarter, different, better, or are we going to get more of the same?
Uh,
If we're going to get, are we going to have 50 speeches from a hideous, giggling? Who's the stupid angel? Inarius is the bad one.
yeah.
I noticed recently listening to some of those. Every angel talks like a normal human with a little bit of echo. They're all this sort of this ghostly voice, Tyrael and stuff.
Right.
Inarius talks like all the demons, the same raspy rah, 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 rah voice. So subtle foreshadowing there of the Chris Metzen variety, I think, but
Right.
who knows?
Wait. Are you telling me there's going to be a fallen former hero who is going to turn into a villain?
Other than Isual, yes.
Hmm. Yeah. Another cliche. Um, but I don't know. I guess like for an expansion, if I have to choose between a better story and just a better game overall, I'm gonna choose that, the gameplay. Because I mean, I think they're getting on the way there, and um, I know they're two different departments too when you're dealing with story versus the gameplay. But um, if I'm cheering for one, I guess it's just a smoother, better delivery for the game itself. Um, because we've had a year of patches, and it'd be nice to just kind of hit the ground and get going and just make sure the game is good.
Yeah, no one's going to say they should make the story better and not improve the itemization or whatever. But, there
Right.
are more than one person working on this game. There is more than one person working on this game, as far as we know, anyway.
That would be
And they
great.
can do different things at once.
Right. The question is, are they capable of deviating past the story and the cliches that they've already set? are they capable of breaking the mold? And does it happen with the expansion or does it happen somewhere else?
And do they want to? Or do they think the story was great and that anyone complaining is wrong and it actually went over really well?
Right,
So, I mean, they made the story they wanted to make, and it's just this real dichotomy between the interest and the smartness and the cleverness and the details of the subtle stuff versus the main themes. So,
right.
and that's not an accident. They did it that way on purpose. So I think we're screwed basically. But no one's really playing the game for the story. We're looking for other things.
That's
So.
true. That's true.
Okay, console. Speaking of things that are kind of expected and sort of happened and no one really cared, we kind of, they've been teasing us forever saying, oh, Diablo will be the best project to go to a console, and we're not sure if we'll do it. These kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Blizzard, we're talking about something, but it's not actually announced yet
Right,
things. And then eventually they announced it, and it's basically the same game. But there are some interesting things where they're not going to have an auction house, which is, unimaginable.
right,
To digress on that briefly, there's been a lot of pushback on the auction house in recent months. People saying they don't like it, that it forces you to play a certain way. They want self-found, they want Ironborn. And then this week, after 108 and the whole duping thing, the auction house was offline for 3 days, and there were like crack addicts like couldn't get their dealer on his beeper. Where is my auction house? I want a refund. You should have done a rollback of everything in the world. You should have rolled me back 3 months to avoid having one day of no auction house. Like people were like crack addicts. I mean, it was 3 days with a brand new patch and tons of new content,
right.
and they couldn't peddle their rare boots for 50K, and they were just pissed out of their minds. So does this give us a sense of maybe the auction house is more necessary, or is it just a love-hate thing?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the auction house being what it is has controlled the way we trade and the way we interact. And it wasn't just the auction house, but like gold trading in and of itself. So like even if you could, join, on our forums or, on the official Blizzard forums to try and trade with people, you couldn't even do that. So just like Oz was saying, you just see all your stuff stockpiling up and you can't do anything with it. So I don't know if it's that we love the auction house or is that we just have become so accustomed to it that without it we don't know what we can do or what would be easy.
Well, the main
So
effect it had is drop rates, right? So and I think that's the biggest complaint. And I don't really have a problem with the auction house. It's an efficient trading system. I'm fine with it overall. But you're playing these games, and what is it? I don't even know what the ratio is. 100 out of 101 items you're looking at is, oh, this is crap. I'm going to sell this to a vendor. And what if you couldn't go to the auction house and get 50,000 gold so that you could upgrade a few gems? That seems like it would be even more frustrating to people because it would really put into relief how low a percentage chance it is to get a good item, get an upgrade at this point.
yes, you couldn't turn off the auction house in the game today for most people anyway. You'd have to improve drop rates and stuff, and they say that's what they're going to do with the console. So many people, once the console details came out, we saw these rage posts. The console is what D3 should have been all along, and why have I been playing an 8 month beta test on the PC, etc. So because Bobby wanted the money, that's why. Gold plated toilets in his guest mansion. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, there's been speculation, including by myself, that maybe in Diablo 3 expansion, we had those quotes from Jay Wilson a few months ago saying the auction house hurt the game and it was kind of a bad idea in some ways. But yet most people still use it, and we ran a vote recently. Like 80% of people said they use it regularly or at least occasionally. So most people who are playing the game do use the auction house, and yet most people blame the auction house for all the problems in the game.
It's I don't know, it's a love hate.
Speaking of, okay, Philosopher King, chew that one over.
Well, it's a lack of a different option. I, it's what we're stuck with, so we have to use it. So as a result, maybe we've grown accustomed to it. I think that's really it. If there was something else out there, we would use it, but there's not. So we just do what we can. Like if we could go back to naming games and trying to trade with people or whatever, we would do that. But since we can't, we just use the auction house. That's about it.
Do you miss WUG and WIF and all these other stupid?
Acronyms, yeah, those
I
were
mean, I was just I was just thinking about, having a lack of a commerce. As is an accountant here, so he can lead us forth on this in a second. But there's really never been a non-currency based Diablo game. I mean, there wasn't gold wasn't of any value in previous games, but you had runes and chippies and SOJs and whatever.
Right.
I mean, I just I sold you this armor a couple days ago for 65 million, and what if we had to trade that? What could you possibly have found, even as someone who's you're friendly with and you can make a deal with? It's like, well, go find two unities and I'll take that instead or something. I mean, it's just there's just I just
No.
don't see how you could function. I mean, I very seldom traded in Diablo 2. The only one I really recall, I traded a Storm Shield for an Eagle Horn, which wasn't even really equivalent. I think the Storm Shield was a little bit better at that point, but it's like I wasn't going to try to transfer that into 600 runes and then try to figure out some amount that he would take for it.
Right.
And I just don't see that we could ever go back to a barter system. I mean, can you imagine that, Oz? And tell us why that doesn't work in an economic sense.
It it's inefficient. I mean, that's the bottom line. Is what you just hit on. Not only would you have to find two unities, you have to find two good unities, but not too good. Um, the auction house just enables you to list something, go away, and somebody else who can use it gives you something useful that you can use. You can either save it up or you can spend it on another item. But it removes the fact that it removes the way of, okay, I've got this piece. It's for a barbarian. I've got to find a barbarian who wants that piece and has a witch doctor item that I want, and they have to be roughly equivalent. So I don't think that the auction house is a poor concept, but people who really liked hitting the item jackpot in Diablo 2 don't like it because it takes away, takes down the drop rates. Otherwise, if everybody's finding great items, you probably wouldn't be using it so much, or people would already have left the game because they already found all the best items. The drop rates are too high. So it, the again, I've never had a problem with it. Use it if you want to use it. If you don't want to use it, then don't. But I think it makes trading, and I never did trading in Diablo 2, a lot easier.
A guy posted a big like dream wish list of features for the expansion the other day, and he had this whole thing about it was on the official forums about how he wanted like a trading post sort of thing instead of the auction house, and like you would list your item and people could like type their entries in and say, I'll give you this for it instead. And it was all like people like, oh, that'd be so wonderful, and people were like, are you out of your goddamn mind? That would never ever work, because he's not going to want what you want, and you just want something that you can trade for whatever. And you're not going to trade, okay, I want 17,000 flawless rubies and I'll take it for this. It's just this, you need something that you can transfer. The other thing that really drove me crazy in Diablo 2 trying to trade is that people had wildly different ideas of the value of items, and there was no central system of here's what it's actually worth.
Right.
Kind of on forums you had trade values and stuff, but you'd get especially people who had like found their one really good item ever, and they would want like three times what it was worth for people who actually knew what its scarcity was, and you would be like, no, that's not what it's worth, and they wouldn't believe you. And you can see that today in the auction house quite easily, where you go look and you'll look at whatever you want, and there'll be a couple of them for 40 million, and then there's one with the same stats for 117 million, and you're like, this is not even as good as this other one, and it's three times the price. And obviously you can do that, and then after 36 hours you can do it again, but you know but at least it's not the one person you can find in a wug 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 conversation who has what you want and then wants 10 times what it's worth.
And then
So I mean, I like the auction house because it gives you a hard and fast system of here's what X is worth, and if you don't want that, you don't take it, and you can just keep the item forever. So go ahead, Sam.
well, I was just gonna say, part of the other system with WUG was, you had to hope that, you would encounter another person who would happen to have exactly what you were looking for, but had more realistic expectations. And sadly, that didn't happen too often. So then you would, maybe get desperate, and maybe there was maybe a little bit of a strategy to overpricing things, because if people want them or want them badly enough to not want to search them out anymore, you could get what you ended up wanting. Um, I traded a lot in Diablo 2, but it was always kind of those paperclip trades, starting with a paperclip and working your way up to something much bigger. Um, like, starting out with chip gems and then people's legendaries or uniques. I've already been converted. But grabbing their uniques and then trading them for more uniques until eventually I got gear that I really wanted. I kind of liked that game of starting with nothing and then making my way to the top.
The one time it worked, and the rest of the time you were just frustrated because you were stuck on an apple, and the other guy only had three clothespins and a Barbie doll,
Right, right.
which is the beauty of trading.
But the,
The other thing I think also it's much more complicated in Diablo 3 because my example earlier, an eagle horn for a storm shield. Imagine that in Diablo 3 with the variability of stats on legendaries.
right, and that
Yeah, it's
was
just like no.
yeah, that's the big
An eagle horn
difference.
can be worth absolutely nothing or be worth the second best item in the game or whatever. Actually, I don't think that we have eagle horns anymore, but or storm. We do have storm shields. They just suck.
Yeah,
But you know what I'm saying? There's just so much variability. And the specialization, I mean, just recently I switched my monk on hardcore to do some more Tempest Rush stuff. And for that, I needed to get a really good Inya's hat with Spirit Regen and Magic Find, ideally. And I needed to get a Stone of Jordan that had good bonuses to monk, to regen, to Spirit Regen, and to other skills, and to elite damage.
right.
And I found several of both of those items in my Diablo 3 playing time. None of them had anything approaching the stats I wanted.
Hmm,
And Stone of Jordans are really hard to find and really hard to get with monk stats and really hard to get with good monk stats, and which is why they cost a fortune in hardcore.
right.
And it's just the specialization of wanting something. There's like quite often you look in hardcore, you look for a specific item, like look for like a unity with dexterity and attack speed, and there's like one in the entire auction house or two, and they usually want 2 billion gold for it. But there's just unless you have a gigantic pool of people to trade with, it's just so hard to find someone who has what you want.
Yeah, it would be quite the hassle to go back to trading, but those people who really hate the auction house are supportive of that idea.
Yeah, well, they're wrong. Okay, speaking of the auction house, Ahaz, any pet peeves of anything you really like or dislike about it? I mean, I'm still driven crazy by the fact that you can't mark items to follow. You have to research them again. And, I mean, does that bother you? Anything else you'd like to see added to it?
That does bother me. It's bothered me since launch, I guess. It seems like such a common sense thing to put in. The values that you enter are still bother me. Like, did I put 100,000 or did I put a million? Okay, let me go list it, and then I have to go to my auctions tab and see. Okay, it looks like I got it right. Or if I don't put a buyout on, well, I hope I got it right.
Yeah, the lack of commas. I just texted Xanth about that like 2 days ago. I'm like, I know I'm going to list something one day for 8 million instead of 80 million
Yeah,
or whatever,
yeah.
Yeah,
and it'll be gone in 1/10 of a second. And I'll be like, wait, where's my gold?
yeah, I did that. I had a pair of Inna's pants. I think I listed it for, I wanted 15 million. I listed it for 1.5.
Mm.
And I
Did
was,
they sell?
oh, they sold immediately. All of a sudden, I've got gold waiting for me. I'm like, shit.
You're
Um,
like, oh, that was quick. Oh, wait.
I mean, I'd rather it happen with the difference is 10 million as opposed to 100.
Yeah, I was listing some ice climbers yesterday for 80 million, and man, I was counting those
Yeah.
zeros. I'm like one, two, three. Like you're hitting like you're going back and checking hitting the space bar and stuff, and it's like, okay, let's see here. And then like 6 months ago, this became an issue. People were posting about it and complaining, and Blizzard was like, "Well, different countries in the world have different nomenclatures, and some people use periods, and some people use commas." It's like,
But it's on
and
the other
just
display screens.
and we're just like smacking our, there was the sound you heard was face palming around the world. It's like, I don't give a damn if they put,
Yes,
tildes.
right.
Just put something after every three digits. Is that too much to ask?
Right.
And yes, apparently it is too much to ask, so we're still waiting for that.
The
Someday.
the tooltip was obviously nice that they added in the latest patch. At least I assume it's there. I'm pretty sure it's there. I haven't
The
been
hover
on it all that
compare.
much.
Yeah, we can finally compare items without sending ourselves text messages about those items. That's really nice.
Oh yeah, or flooding the trade channels and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a blast.
I'm really wondering if that's going to change values of things, because it's often really hard to compare. I mean, if you're looking at jewelry or something, especially,
Right.
and if you're changing like 50%, like it's got 50% more critical hit, but 10% less critical damage. Or sorry, switch those two values.
Sure.
And it's got, then I mean, like if you're comparing fairly high-end stuff, it's really hard to figure in your head. This has 20 to 40 damage and 160 dex and attack speed and 5% critical damage, critical chance, versus this other one that's got four different stats, but all still good. And you just can't figure it out in your head. You have to send yourself a text message and go look at it afterwards. But I was looking at some, like I was comparing. I have a couple of pretty good quadfecta jewelries on my monk, and looking at other ones last night. And before I would have really just had to sort of guesstimate, is this one any better or worse or not? And I was looking, and there were ones for like 40 million that were actually better than the ones for 80 and 100 million in DPS and in hit points.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if people are, these are all still. This is like 2 hours after the auction house went back up. When we just got this compare option. So I'm really wondering if it's going to change over time. And who have been kind of guesstimating and just throwing figures out there previously are going to be looking, oh, and now I know exactly which one is better or not better. But how will we ever know how it changes? So speaking of the auction house, we have this whole issue where just this week, where suddenly there was a few very rich players. What do the posts say today? 451 people used it or something,
Yeah, 415.
and capable of duping 2 trillion, 2 billion gold at a time or something like that. And so now that you've got 500 trillion gold, as how is it going?
Well, except for the whole ban thing. No, it's kind of funny. I didn't. Well, I don't actually have a RMAH account, so wasn't
Wink,
doing it.
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Me either.
Trust me, just
400,
go look.
414 of them do though.
Yeah, yeah, go look at my character screens. You'll see. Oh no, this guy's gear sucks. But uh, I don't really consider it a big long term problem. Even if some money got out there that wasn't supposed to, it'll have maybe a short term impact, but I think it'll all equalize over time or restabilize. I mean, if I want a Mempo with crit chance, it's 2 billion gold. I don't have 2 billion gold. Like I said earlier, I had 50 million at one time. So the only way for me to get that is either to find it or find something that will sell for a whole lot of money. Well, if the whole lot of money now is 20 billion instead of 2 billion, I still got to find that item first and then decide, do I want to sell it for 20 billion so I can afford a Mempo or not. So I don't really consider it being a long-term problem. Now, it's a pretty bad bug to let get through. So that was really the disappointing thing.
And you play hardcore only, Xanth. Why do you even care if there's a real money auction house duping bug, gold bug?
Well, I mean, the consequences therein, and what happened after. I picked a very bad week to die. To have to even think about leveling without having the auction house up as a little bit of a crutch was painful. But I think it's also the actions of the players, and what happened as it kind of came out into light, and then obviously seeing our dependence on it. I've never cashed out for real money or anything like that, so I can completely understand how much of a huge bug this really is. But to kind of see what people were doing, it was disappointing. I was able to jump on to one of the streams and see some of the exploits that were going out, and just kind of laughing in the face of what they were doing. It was actually really disappointing, to watch, and it kind of shows what happens when people can find an exploit, and how they go about doing it. Um, yeah.
Do you have an opinion on the rollback versus the individual case by case? It takes 3 days, but we won't screw everybody else thing.
I mean, I understood it, but it seemed like the quicker option was to roll back. As much as it would have sucked for anybody during those 6 hours, I, I can't. I'm curious how many people didn't log in because they knew the auction house was down, or like didn't play nearly as much because they knew it was down, or they wouldn't trade or whatever. Because that's such a big part of the game, is being able to find items, get items, and since the auction house is the main mode of it, when that's down, what do you do?
The real irony is two of the three people on this podcast cannot comment on this objectively because that Zuni's armor that you're now wearing on your Demon Hunter was found the night of this, which would have been the rollback time.
Ooh,
So half of my current gold and your best character's best armor would be gone if they had done a rollback. Of course, you could have bought equivalent thing for about the same gold out anyway. But
well,
so really, it's only me that would have been affected by it.
and
But
who knows? Maybe my monk would still be alive at that point.
ooh, well, he didn't die during the rollback time. But yeah,
True, but maybe I.
but you would have played differently, or
Right, exactly. Um, so maybe, but I guess as long as the consequences for the people who did it are vast and they take care of it, I guess that's all that we can ask for. And they've been pretty big with the ban hammer, so that's good.
So what do you think about the whole rollback versus restoration thing, Oz?
I think they made the right choice just because 415 out of how many people that actually play, you risk alienating so many people who didn't do anything wrong, for the small subset of people that did. I think it made more sense from a customer service standpoint to just close the auction house, let everybody else play, and then go after those specific accounts that did it. And I also hope that they changed their QA process so that think about all the man hours that they had to put into this for this relatively straightforward bug that they didn't apparently didn't test. That's got to
And
change.
it was not testable on the PTR because there's no real money auction house on the PTR anyway.
Right.
And it was something added in like the last 2 weeks because it wasn't in the patch notes previously. They were changing from 1 million to 10 million for the basic gold sale. And there was just an elementary, mathematical issue in the coding that made the game could not handle numbers that large.
Right.
And then as part of the error, it would feed you back half the gold you would just cancel on your auction. So people could literally make 2 billion like a second.
So when you're dealing with real actual currency, like not Diablo gold, but hard cash, you need to have your internal people do some rudimentary testing before you release the software. You got to do it.
Of course, the problem now is I think they really wanted to hurry this patch out to get it out before anniversary week, and maybe that's part of the reason they rushed this change in at the last minute, and it nearly destroyed the entire economy of the game. So,
Well, the worst part is too is like this is a great patch and there's a lot of cool stuff about it, but one of the things that we think about with it is this whole debacle, and unfortunately that detracted far too much from what actually it should have done.
Love the patch.
but yeah, just my point is that we're gonna, we always see the patches take too long and they spend too long testing it and being careful and cautious, and well, now we know why. So when the next patch takes a month longer than we want it to, we can all flash back to this and say, remember the time the real money auction house bug, and then we'll all be understanding and no one will complain.
Q
Yeah,
Q
right.
Q Q.
Right.
Rabble, rabble, rabble. So, any other auction house thoughts, guys? You
No,
love it, but you love it and you hate it and you can't live without it.
I'm happy to have it back.
Ditto here. I mean, I
Are
use
you
it.
are you married in real life, Oz?
I am.
So you guys are both married and have a wife, so you know what it's like to love someone, hate someone, and not be able to live without them at the same time. So the auction house is a very natural,
Yeah.
parallel for
We
you.
are
So,
experienced in that area. Yes.
And we can also safely say that neither of your wives listen to this podcast. So,
yeah, that's very true.
so there
I
we
can't
go.
think of anything my wife would want to do less than listen to a Diablo podcast.
Well, all the better for us and your uncensored mannerisms.
Indeed.
Okay. And I'm single, so I'm free to say the podcast sucks, and also the auction house sucks, or both, or neither. I forget which.
Um, all right, all right. This can just be your marriage. It's okay.
Sadly, it is. I spend more time. Do you spend more time with your wife or Diablo 3 auction house?
Wife, obviously.
If she's not listening, you don't have to lie.
Depends on the day.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for your time, guys,
Yeah.
and good luck on the realms.
Appreciate
Yay.
it.
Moo.
Moo.
Moo.